everyone, welcome to another Brain Dojo podcast. Now, I wanted to speak to you today about outsourcing your thoughts. So what do I mean by outsourcing your thoughts? Well, we have a choice. We can think for ourselves in every situation. We can look at all of the factors that are involved in any situation, and we can decide to make our own decision. Or we can look at what everyone else thinks, and we can use that to make our decisions. Now, let's look at this as we grow up. So let's start as a child. Well, when we're babies, when we're tiny infants, we don't really have any choice. We can't decide anything for ourselves. We know nothing. We have no experience with which to make decisions or form opinions, and we don't even know what opinions are. We just don't have any concept of having an opinion or having any idea how to make them, and that makes perfect sense. Obviously, the next stage is being a child, a small child. Well, you're starting to gain some experience. You're starting to see how the world works. You're starting to see patterns. You're starting to see how other people around you behave and these type of things. And you're starting to have the capability to make decisions for yourself. And it's at this stage, really, where I believe we start to develop a pattern. Now, do we start to make decisions for ourselves? Do we think for ourselves, or do we go with the majority? Yeah, and the classic playground thing is, if a group of kids are being unkind to another kid, are you the sort of person who joins in with the group because you want to feel like, I'm part of the group, I fit right in here? Or are you likely to make a stand and go with the person who's being ridiculed or made fun of? Or are you neutral? Are you somewhere in between? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong or right or good or bad about any of those things, but it does, I believe, say that that's where we start to decide whether to make our own decisions or to adopt other people's, whether we outsource our opinions and our thoughts. So then we become youths. We grow up a little bit, we become youths, we're teenagers. And you have the classic teenage thing of rebelling against your parents a little bit and wanting to think differently to them. Well, that's great, because that's a learning process. And I've had two boys. I know that time, that period of parenthood, can be challenging. But it's okay. You get through it, because if you can look at it and say that it's part of the normal process, part of those children wanting to break free, to have their own thoughts, that's good. And sometimes, I can remember thinking this myself. Geez, you kids, you think differently from me to how I think, simply because you want to think differently. And then I think, well, actually, that's not a bad way to experiment and to see how things can develop. Because breaking away is essential at some point, a good idea at some point. All right, so then eventually we become adults. And as I'm sure you can tell by what I've said already, a lot of our processes are formed. How we make decisions, how we think about things. Do we really consider the opinions of others? Do we really think that we want to be part of the herd, the tribe, the crew? Or are we happy to think for ourselves? And this is the thing that I was going to say bothers me. Does it bother me? Well, not really. It doesn't really bother me. It concerns me a little bit, because I think how much better things could be for everyone if everyone didn't outsource their thoughts. And I think there are a large majority of people who really are quite happy to outsource all their thinking to news, colleagues, family members, the media generally, not just news media, but the media generally, or even entertainment. How many people do you know that think a certain way or think something must be true because an entertainer, a film star, a pop star, someone famous thinks that way? And of course, the media and advertisers know this because they use these well-known people to promote their products to try and influence us to buy them and whatever. And I think that's less sinister than those people trying to influence us in other ways. To buy a product is one thing, but to try to influence the way people think and conduct their lives is quite. I think it's quite not quite sinister, really. Anyway, the whole purpose of this little podcast, vlogcast, whatever you want to call it, the whole purpose of this is to get you to have a look at yourself and say, do I outsource my thoughts? Is all my thinking done by other people? Do I look at any situation where I need to have an opinion, where I would like to have an opinion, and do I just adopt the opinion of somebody else? Even I think some of us even adopt an opinion of something. How do I explain this? Adopt an opinion that we think somebody else would have. Let's say you've got a good friend and you hang out with them quite a lot and you talk about things. You talk about lots of subjects, and something comes up on a subject that you may have spoken about in the past, and you think, let's call him Fred, for instance. Oh, Fred would think this about this because I've heard what he says about these sorts of things. Yeah, okay. Well, I'll have Fred's opinion because that seems to work, and Fred and I will stay tight then. Are you doing that? And again, I'm not telling you it's wrong. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but thinking for yourself will give you more freedom. Thinking for yourself will allow you to be yourself. Thinking for yourself will allow you to not necessarily be a reflection of the people you hang out with. There's a really good expression that floats around that says we become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Well, I think that's true in a lot of cases. I do my very best to make sure that I'm not. Now, 2 things that I do here. I don't want anyone who I hang out with to be offended by that, because the reason I hang out with people is because I like hanging out with you. And I think that your participation in my life is good for me. So that's a good thing. If we hang out together, then you know that. And secondly, I don't want to be influenced by other people. I quite like to debate things. I quite like to have my own thoughts on things. And I don't mind if someone, even a close friend, even someone I'm really tight with, I don't mind if they have a completely different view on something that we discuss, a different view to me. It doesn't make any difference to me. I think it's great that they think for themselves. But do consider that expression. We become the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with, and that's a powerful statement, isn't it? Do you want to be the average of those 5 people? You may have a group of 5 people around you that are just brilliant, inspirational, and you might think it's not bad. All right, well, that's good. But even within that group, if you are the 5th member or the 6th member, or even within that group, be yourself. Think for yourself. Think the thoughts that represent you and help you to be you. All right, so I'm going to leave it there today. This, whatever we call it, vlogcast, podcast, video excerpt, whatever we want to call it, this leads on nicely to something that I want to talk about, and maybe next time, maybe another time, is intellectual obesity. Right, so I'd like you to think about that phrase. We all know what obesity is aimed at, what that means, but I want you to have a little bit of think about intellectual obesity. All right, good. I'll speak to you soon. Thanks for listening.